All right, diving in today, folks, getting ready for a deep dive. And this one is all about the fascinating, intricate world of, well, how our brains actually learn.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about this one. We've got your incredible notes and insights pulled from James E. Zoll's The Art of Changing the Brain.
Yep.
And our mission here, if we choose to accept it, is to really break down those core biological principles of learning, and not just for the sake of it, but to really explore how understanding this stuff can make us better teachers and, hey, even better learners ourselves.
Yeah.
Figuring out how we can actually optimize how we absorb and use knowledge.
Absolutely.
You flag some pretty key excerpts from the book, too, really focusing on how the brain builds knowledge, how it changes based on what we experience, how it interacts with the world around us. I think it's going to be pretty insightful.
And the thing that strikes me right off the bat looking at the material you sent over is that the author, this James Zoll, he comes at this from like a really unique perspective.
Yeah.
He's an expert in biology,
Yeah.
obviously, but also in learning and education. So he's not just looking at the brain in isolation. He's looking at it within the context of like how we teach and how we learn. And he's not afraid to get into the nitty-gritty science here and even like dip his toes into some pretty interesting philosophical questions.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, like what does it really mean to know something,
Hmm.
that kind of stuff. But his main point, the thing he keeps coming back to, is that if we want to truly understand learning and teaching, we have to look at it through the lens of biology. Like what's actually happening in our brains when we learn something new.
Oh,
He does tie it back to some of the big educational theories out there, like sometimes he'll lean more towards traditional views, sometimes more towards those constructivist ideas,
okay.
but he always brings it back to that biological basis.
Yeah,
Always.
I like that. That's a good foundation to work from. So we're basically taking a trip inside our own minds, huh?
Pretty much.
Figuring out how our brains take all that abstract knowledge, all those facts and ideas, and actually turn it into something real, something physical, through these complex networks of neurons,
Exactly.
and how those networks are constantly changing, like rewiring themselves based on what we do, what we see, what we think about.
It's pretty amazing when you think about it.
Yeah, and we can't forget about the super important roles that things like our senses, our emotions, and even our past experiences play in this whole learning process. We'll get into all that too.
We'll definitely be exploring that. And one thing I found really intriguing is that the author, he even talks about these teaching gods.
Teaching gods.
Yeah, it's kind of a poetic way of putting it. He's talking about those times when teaching is just like incredibly effective. Those moments where everything clicks and the student has this aha moment, even if the explanation on the surface was pretty straightforward.
I've definitely had those moments as a teacher and as a learner too.
Absolutely. And it kind of points to the fact that even though we can explain a lot about how learning works, there's still this element of mystery to it. Like, why does it work so well sometimes and not so well at other times?
So it's not just a simple formula, there's something more to it.
Right. But even with all that complexity, even with those teaching gods, the author's very clear about one thing.
What's that?
Facts still matter. And understanding the biology of how we think is incredibly important. He makes this really interesting point that everything our minds produce, every thought, every idea, every invention, it all starts with the brain interacting with our bodies and the world around us.
So understanding the brain isn't just an academic exercise, it's something that can actually help us learn and teach better.
Exactly. It can give us new tools for education, and it can even change how we think about thinking itself.
Hmm.
Like, it has implications for both how we do things and for how we understand the world. It's both practical and philosophical.
I'm definitely intrigued. So to kind of map out where we're headed today, I think we should start with the basics, like how is the brain structured? How do different parts of the brain work together when we're learning? And how do emotions factor into all of this?
That's a great plan.
Once we have that foundation, we can then dig deeper into part 2 of the book, which really focuses on what knowledge is, how it exists in the brain, and how it changes over time.
Awesome.
And I'm especially interested in those recommendations the author gives for teachers, because I think those can apply to all of us as learners too.
Agreed. So jumping right in, one of the key takeaways from part 2 is that our prior knowledge, all the things we already know, it's not just some like abstract cloud of information floating around in our heads. It actually exists physically in our brains as these amazing networks of interconnected neurons.
So our knowledge is literally wired into our brains.
Exactly. And the author is very clear about the importance of this prior knowledge. He says it's the foundation for all new learning. Like, you can't just create new knowledge out of nothing. You have to build upon what you already know.
So it's like you can't build a house without a foundation.
That's a perfect analogy. And these neuronal networks, they're not easily erased. What we learn tends to stick around.
Which is good and bad, I guess, depending on what you've learned.
Haha, yeah, exactly. So for teachers, or even for anyone trying to share information with someone else, the big takeaway here is that you have to start by acknowledging and connecting with what the learner already knows. You can't just ignore their existing knowledge and expect them to just absorb new information in a vacuum.
Makes sense. So if that's the foundation, how do these neuronal networks actually change when we learn something new? What's happening on a physical level?
Well, the process of learning actually involves making physical changes to the connections between neurons, which are called synapses. These changes can happen in a few different ways. Existing connections can become stronger or weaker, depending on how often they're used.
Okay.
And totally new connections can form between neurons that weren't connected before. It's like building new roads in a city, and then sometimes old connections that aren't used very much, they get pruned away. It's like tearing down those abandoned buildings that nobody uses anymore.
So our brains are constantly remodeling themselves based on what we learn.
That's a great way to put it. And there are two main things that drive these changes. One is just natural biological growth and development, which is guided by our genes and by these things called epigenetic processes, which are basically changes in how our genes are expressed. And the other driver, which is just as important, is our individual experiences.
So nature and nurture both play a role.
Precisely. And here's a really cool point. The more sensory input our brains get, the more we see, hear, touch, and interact with the world, the more our neurons branch out and form potential connections.
So a stimulating environment actually leads to physical changes in the brain.
Exactly.
Huh.
And those neurons that are firing, the ones that are active, they're the ones that are most likely to form new and stronger connections.
Yeah,
It's like use it or lose it for the brain.
that makes a lot of sense. And that reminds me of something you mentioned in your notes, the Hebbian principle.
Oh, yes. The famous neurons that fire together wire together.
Yeah, that one. So what does that actually mean for learning?
Basically, it means that when you repeatedly activate a certain pathway in the brain, when those neurons fire together over and over, those connections become stronger and more efficient. Like the more you practice something, the easier it becomes.
Hmm.
But there's a really interesting flip side to this.
Oh,
The author suggests that if you keep focusing on a wrong connection, if you keep correcting someone's mistake over and over, you might actually be strengthening that incorrect pathway.
so all that negative reinforcement might not be so effective after all.
Exactly. He suggests that it might be better to focus on building up the correct pathways rather than trying to tear down the wrong ones. Like instead of always saying, no, that's wrong, maybe it's better to say, here's how you can do it right.
Okay, so more positive reinforcement, less focus on the mistakes.
Right. He talks about strategies like errorless learning, where you just repeatedly expose the learner to the correct information without dwelling on the errors, and also building upon existing understandings, even if they're not perfectly accurate, as ways to kind of nudge the brain in the right direction.
So it's more about gently guiding the learner rather than trying to force them to change their thinking.
Exactly. It's about working with the brain, not against it.
I love that. Okay, so we've laid some really good groundwork here about how knowledge takes shape in the brain and how we can encourage positive changes. But now I'm curious about part 3 of the book, which you said goes deeper into how we can use more of our cerebral cortex, the thinking part of our brains, to really enhance and deepen our learning.
Yeah, part 3 gets into the nitty-gritty of the learning cycle. That progression from having a concrete experience to reflecting on it, then forming abstract ideas, and finally testing those ideas out in the real world.
Oh, yeah, I remember that from our prep.
Well, what's really cool here is how the author maps those stages
Yeah.
onto specific parts of the brain. So when we have that initial concrete experience, that's heavily involving our sensory cortex, which is where all that sensory input comes in. What we see, hear, touch, smell, and taste. Then, when we move into reflection and start forming those abstract ideas, that's when the integrative cortex in the back of our brain really kicks into gear. This part of the brain is all about connecting the dots, making sense of new information based on what we already know, and helping us form those big picture concepts.
So the back of the brain is like the integration center.
Exactly. And then finally, when we move into that active experimentation phase, when we put our ideas to the test, that's when the motor cortex takes over. This is the part of the brain that controls our movements, so it makes sense that it would be involved in this stage. But here's the key point. Communication between all these brain regions is a two-way street.
So it's not like information just flows in a straight line from one part of the brain to the next.
Nope. It's a constant back and forth, with information flowing back and forth, refining our understanding at each stage. It's like a feedback loop.
That makes it seem much more dynamic and interactive than I originally imagined. And the author seems to really emphasize the importance of that initial sensory experience, right?
Absolutely. He says that the sensory brain is absolutely essential for learning. He even says, and I love this quote, "We understand by seeing, visualizing."
So even when we're thinking about abstract ideas, we're still using our senses.
It seems that way. And he makes this really interesting point about the difference between experts and novices. He says that both experts and novices see the same things. They take in the same sensory information.
Okay.
But experts have learned to pay attention to the right details. They know what's important and what's not.
So it's not just about seeing more, it's about seeing better, seeing with understanding.
Exactly. And that has big implications for teaching. It means that as teachers or even as mentors, we need to help learners focus their attention on the details that really matter.
Help them see the forest for the trees, so to speak.
Exactly. And here's another interesting point about attention. He says it's not about rigidly focusing on one thing. It's about constantly shifting our focus, scanning for those important details. It's like being a detective, constantly looking for clues.
That makes sense. And he also talks about the power of turning abstract ideas into images, right? Like using visualization to help us understand.
Yes. He says that converting ideas into images is a really powerful learning tool. It helps make those abstract concepts more concrete and memorable.
I can definitely see how that would be helpful. Okay, so we've taken in the information through our senses, and we've started to make sense of it through reflection. What happens next in the learning cycle?
That's where we move into the realm of deeper understanding, the realm of reflection. And this is where that integrative cortex in the back of our brains really shines.
We're back to the integration center.
We are. And during reflection, we're forming those mental images we were just talking about. But we're also connecting new information to our past experiences,
Yeah.
to those existing neuronal networks that we talked about earlier.
So it's about making connections between new and old knowledge.
Exactly. And the author makes an interesting point about the pace of learning here. He says that speed isn't everything. Just because someone learns something quickly doesn't mean they've really understood it deeply.
So taking time to reflect is crucial for real learning.
Absolutely. He even suggests that sleep and dreaming might play a role in this process, in helping us sort through and make sense of new information.
That's fascinating.
It is, isn't it? And of course, we can't forget about language. Language is closely tied to those mental images we form, and it's how we express and share what we've learned.
So it's not just about understanding the words themselves, it's about understanding the ideas behind them.
Exactly. And he points out that understanding language also involves paying attention to things like rhythm and tone, which can convey a lot of meaning.
That's true. You can say the same words in completely different ways and convey totally different meaning.
Exactly. So it's not just about the words themselves, it's about the whole package.
Got it. So we've reflected on the new information, made connections, started to form some deeper understanding. What's the next step in this learning journey?
Well, after reflection comes what the author calls the courageous leap to abstraction. This is where we move from concrete experiences to those more abstract, big picture concepts. And it's where the frontal integrative cortex in the front of our brain really takes center stage.
Ah, a new part of the brain enters the game.
Exactly. This part of the brain is all about creating those abstract ideas, planning, and those executive functions like attention, task management, and working memory.
So it's like the command center of our brains.
That's a good way to put it. And the author reminds us that our working memory has limits. We can only hold so much information in our minds at once.
That's why it's so hard to remember a long list of items or to follow complex instructions without writing them down.
Exactly. So for teachers, this means breaking down complex information into smaller, more manageable chunks. And for learners, it means finding ways to offload some of that mental work, like taking notes or using memory aids.
Okay, that's practical advice. And he also suggests that our abstract thinking is rooted in our physical experiences, right?
Yes. He says that we think by ordering those mental images in a way that's consistent with how things work in the real world.
Mm-hmm.
Like our abstract thinking is grounded in our concrete experiences.
That makes sense. And after we form those abstract ideas, we move into the final stage of the learning cycle, active testing.
Right. This is where we put those ideas to the test, where we see if they actually hold up in the real world. And it's crucial because it provides that sensory feedback that closes the loop of the learning cycle.
So it's not enough to just think about something, we have to actually do something with it.
Exactly. And he makes this interesting point that sometimes action can actually come before sensing and learning, especially for young children.
So sometimes we learn by doing, even before we fully understand what we're doing.
That's right. It's like learning to ride a bike. You don't necessarily understand all the physics behind it before you start pedaling.
That's a great example. Okay, so we've covered the learning cycle, the different parts of the brain involved, and the importance of sensory input, reflection, abstraction, and action. But we haven't talked about the role of emotions yet.
Ah, yes. Emotions. They're not just something that happens alongside learning. They're an integral part of the process. They shape how we think, how we remember, and how motivated we are to learn.
So it's not just about cold, hard facts.
Nope, not at all. Our emotions play a huge role. And the author points out that our brains have these powerful systems for fear and pleasure, and those systems are deeply tied to learning.
Like, we avoid things that have caused us pain in the past, and we seek out things that have brought us pleasure.
Exactly. And he emphasizes that intrinsic motivation, that feeling of wanting to learn something because it's interesting or relevant to us, is way more powerful than just relying on external rewards or punishments.
So it's better to be driven by curiosity than by fear of failure or desire for a reward.
Absolutely. And there's this part of our brain called the amygdala, which is like our emotional watchdog. It's constantly monitoring our environment and our internal state, and it influences our attention and our reactions to things.
So our emotions are always at play, even when we're not consciously aware of them.
Right. And here's a really interesting point. The author says that pleasure is linked to movement, both physical and mental.
So when we're making progress, when we're moving forward, we feel good.
Exactly. And that feeling of pleasure can be a powerful motivator to keep learning. And he even goes so far as to say that knowing is a feeling.
Wow, that's a powerful statement.
Right. It suggests that true understanding isn't just a cognitive process, it's an emotional one too. Like when you really know something, you feel it in your gut.
I can definitely relate to that. And he also talks about how strong emotions can both enhance and impair memory, right?
Absolutely. If something really emotionally charged happens, we're more likely to remember it vividly. But sometimes strong emotions can also make it harder to think clearly and to remember things accurately.
So emotions are a double-edged sword when it comes to learning.
In a way, yes, but they're a crucial part of the process nonetheless.
Okay, so we know that emotions are important, but how can we actually use them effectively in teaching and learning?
The author suggests that we need to actively engage those emotional centers in the brain, like make learning more meaningful, more relevant to the learner's life.
So connected to their interests, their passions.
Exactly. And he talks about using stories as a powerful way to engage emotions and make information more memorable.
I love a good story.
Me too. And he also emphasizes the importance of the emotional connection between teacher and student. A positive, supportive relationship can make a huge difference in how much a student learns.
Absolutely. And valuing different learning styles and intelligences is important too, right?
Yeah.
Like recognizing that not everyone learns the same way.
Absolutely. And remember that pleasure we talked about earlier, that feeling of making progress. Well, the author says that teachers should provide support when learning gets tough, but they should also give learners enough space to feel that sense of ownership and accomplishment, that feeling of, I did this myself.
So it's about finding that balance between support and challenge.
Exactly. And ultimately, the teacher's role is to facilitate learning, not to control it.
To guide, not to dictate.
Exactly.
Wow, this has been a really insightful conversation. We've covered a lot of ground.
We have. But it's also interconnected, isn't it?
It is. So let's take a moment to recap some of those key insights before we wrap things up.
So first and foremost, we learned that our brains are physically changing all the time, constantly rewiring themselves as we learn. It's not just some abstract process. It's happening on a physical level, at the level of neurons and synapses.
Right. Our knowledge is literally embodied in our brains.
Exactly. And we explored the learning cycle, that journey from concrete experience to reflection, abstraction, and action. And we saw how different parts of the brain are involved at each stage and how they all work together in this amazing dynamic interplay.
And we talked about the crucial role of sensory input and how paying attention is more about actively shifting our focus than about just staring intently at something.
We did.
Yeah.
And we also discussed the importance of reflection, of connecting new information to what we already know, and of taking time to really process and internalize new knowledge.
It's not a race.
Exactly. And we can't forget about the power of turning abstract ideas into images, of using visualization to make those concepts more concrete and memorable.
And then there's that final crucial step of active testing, of putting our ideas into action and getting that real-world feedback.
Right. And underpinning all of this, we explored the pervasive influence of emotions on how we learn, how our feelings, even the ones we're not consciously aware of, shape our thinking, our motivation, and our memories.
I definitely had a few aha moments during this conversation, like realizing that the speed of learning doesn't necessarily equate to depth of understanding,
That's a big one.
and the idea that knowledge is a physical network in our brains, that it's not just some ephemeral thing. That really struck a chord with me.
That's a powerful image.
And then there's the author's idea that knowing is a feeling, which really resonated with me. It makes learning seem so much more personal and embodied.
It does, doesn't it?
And I love that idea of gently guiding the brain towards understanding, of working with it rather than against it. It
Hmm.
feels much more humane and respectful than just trying to force feed information.
I agree. It's about nurturing growth, not about imposing knowledge.
Exactly. So for anyone listening who's interested in diving deeper into this fascinating topic, I highly recommend checking out James E. Zoll's book, The Art of Changing the Brain. He goes into much more detail about the specific brain structures involved in learning, and he also shares some really practical strategies for applying these principles in real-world teaching situations.
And for all of you who are lifelong learners, who are always seeking new knowledge and expanding your horizons, I think understanding these biological principles can be incredibly empowering. It gives you a framework for understanding how your own brain works, and it gives you tools for becoming a more effective and joyful learner,
It takes some of the mystery out of it.
and adds a whole new layer of wonder.
Exactly. So as we wrap up, I'd like to leave you with a final question to ponder. If our brains are constantly changing based on our experiences, how might we use this knowledge to intentionally shape our own learning?
That's a great question. If we can become more aware of how our brains learn, if we can understand the learning cycle and the role of our emotions, can we actually become architects of our own minds? Can we use this knowledge to learn more effectively, to remember more, and to become the best learners we can be?
I think that's a great place to leave it. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and happy learning, everyone.
Absolutely. Happy learning.